10 of the 16 matchups in the ACC-SEC Challenge get going today, and it's not unrealistic to think the ACC might lose every single one of them.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your solo host for today's episode, Andy Patton, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, Monday through Friday, 52 weeks out of the year. We're here for you wherever you get your podcast. Want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel, and remind you all that today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Folks, download the GameTime app, create an account now, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, the net rankings are out. The first pass at how the net rankings have shaped up in the first month of the season. We're going to break it down, talk about some of the wonkiness, some of the goofiness you see early in the season, give some superlatives as well. Before we do that, though, we got 16 college basketball games to preview today, 10 of them on Tuesday. So we're going to start with those, and then the other 6, including Auburn at Duke and Alabama at North Carolina. We're going to talk about those and the other 4 ACC-SEC games on Wednesday in the second segment. Let's start, though, with the 10 ACC-SEC games taking place Tuesday today. As many of you are listening to this, we're going to go through all of the matchups, quickly talk about any storylines we see, talk about when the games are, what the FanDuel line is, and then we're going to talk about how we think these conferences are going to do. Is it going to be close to split? Is the SEC really going to win all 10 of them? How this might shake out, my predictions for each of these games coming up. The first game in this challenge, John Calipari in Arkansas going to Coral Gables to take on Miami. That game will be Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. All times will be Eastern time. It's on ESPN2. FanDuel favors the Hogs by 3.5. Miami not playing well right now. Lost 4 in a row, including to Drake, Oklahoma State, VCU, and then coming out of that tournament, they lost to Charleston Southern. Been a rough for Jim Larinaga's team. Came after a rough season last year. The fun matchup in this one will be 2 of the freshmen, Jaleel Bethea versus Boogie Fland. That should be a fun matchup to start things off. At the same time, going on ESPNU, Tuesday, 7 p.m., we got Notre Dame taking on Georgia at Georgia. Again, on ESPNU, FanDuel favors the Bulldogs in that one by 8.5 points at home. Notre Dame, like Miami, also lost 4 straight games. 3 of them were in the Players Era Festival, where we kind of thought they were a little overmatched. Rutgers was the most winnable game of those. They did not win that one. They did not win against Houston or Creighton either. Prior to getting to Las Vegas for the Players Era Festival, this team also lost to Elon, hence the 4-game losing streak. Meanwhile, for Georgia, Asa Newell, star freshman forward for them, and Silas Demary, a sophomore, have been a really good 1-2 punch for UGA, and I think they're going to continue to do so against the Notre Dame team that is good with Marcus Burton if he's healthy, but hasn't really looked all that good, especially in the last couple of weeks. Next up, Cal at Missouri. A reminder that Cal is the only one of the 3 new teams in the ACC that is participating. Stanford and SMU are not part of the event for this year. Cal going all the way across the country to take on Dennis Gates and the Tigers, also at 7 p.m. on Tuesday. So you're going to have 3 screens up if you want to watch all of these. In fact, 4 screens up if you want to watch all 4 of them. This one will be on the SEC Network. FanDuel favors Mizzou by 9.5. Cal's 6-1, but they played Vanderbilt earlier this year and got smoked in that game. So I think that's where you're going to see Mizzou get favored. They're also, of course, the home team. Mizzou also 6-1 on the year. Their loss was on the first day of the season on a road game against Memphis. So you like both teams 6-1. You like Mizzou's loss a little bit better, and you like Cal's loss. At this point, Mizzou's at home. You got to favor Gates and the Tigers in that one. Next up, South Carolina at Boston College. Again, the 4th of these games that will start at 7 p.m. on Tuesday. This one, as you probably would have guessed, is on the ACC Network. FanDuel favors the Gamecocks by 3.5. BC got a really nice win over Boise State, a quality win over a very quality program, and then turned around and lost to Dartmouth, who I think was 330th at KenPom at the time of the loss. So Not really sure what to make of that for Boston College and Earl Grant's club. They've been struggling for the last couple of years. Again, nice win over Boise State, but they got a home game here. They got a South Carolina team that is last in the SEC in the net rankings. We'll talk about that later in the show. South Carolina has already lost some pretty ugly games this year. They lost to North Florida in the season opener. They lost at Indiana, who has not looked very good since then. They also lost to Xavier, which is not necessarily a bad loss. But South Carolina is favored by 3.5, even as the road team. But I'm not super confident about Lamont Paris's team in this season after a strong year last year. So we'll see if they're able to go get a road win here over the Eagles. You got Syracuse at Tennessee. This is our first game featuring a team that is ranked in our top 25. For those of you who haven't checked out the Locked On College Basketball Top 25, we post the rankings every Monday on our community channel on YouTube. Also post them on social media, so check them out there. Syracuse going on the road to take on the third-ranked Tennessee Volunteers Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. So this one's a half hour after the other four games get going. And this one will be on the flagship channel, ESPN. FanDuel favoring the Vols by 19.5 points in this one, the largest spread of the known FanDuel lines as we record this right now. And for good reason. Tennessee's awesome. They're undefeated. They got wins over Louisville on the road. They got wins over Virginia and Baylor, both in the Bahamas. Meanwhile, Syracuse lost to Texas. They lost to Texas Tech. They went into double overtime against Youngstown State. They beat Colgate, but I think it was only by 2. This Syracuse team has not looked great in the early going. They have some talent. JJ Starling's great. Eddie Lampkin's been a nice addition for them in the front court, but Tennessee is better. Rick Barnes' team looks very good right now. They're at home. I think that one's going to be a not particularly close matchup. 19.5 is a big spread, without a doubt, but I wouldn't be shocked if Tennessee covers that either. Next up, Georgia Tech at Oklahoma. This one starts at 9 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, ESPNU. So this one will be after the game between Notre Dame and Georgia. FanDuel favors the Sooners right now by 11.5. And why wouldn't you? The Sooners just come off winning the Battle for Atlantis. Was not expected to be the team that won that event by any stretch. And yet here they are picking up a trio of nice wins in the Bahamas. Jeremiah Fears has been fantastic, one of the youngest players in the country, true freshman who reclassified and has been very, very good so far for Porter Moser's team. Meanwhile, Georgia Tech got whacked at home a few weeks ago by Cincinnati. Damon Stoudemire's club not looking good in the early going. There's a real chance that if you told me that Syracuse and Tennessee is not the biggest margin of victory among any of these 10 games, I probably would guess Oklahoma beating Georgia Tech. They're at home. They're coming off some momentum. Georgia Tech not looking good. This one could get ugly fast for the Yellow Jackets. Next up, Wake Forest at Texas A&M, 9 p.m. on ESPN2. This will be the game following Arkansas at Miami. FanDuel right now favoring the Aggies by 11.5. That feels like a big line. That feels like a pretty big spread, in favor of Buzz Williams' team. I'm not a big Wake Forest fan this year. They got that nice win over Michigan, which is going to continue to age well, it appears. They have losses to Xavier and Florida, not bad losses, although they got beat pretty good by Florida in that one. A&M, meanwhile, has that loss at Central Florida to start the year. They also lost to Oregon in the Players Era Festival, but they beat Creighton, they beat Ohio State, they beat Rutgers. This A&M team is really hard to pin down. When Wade Taylor IV is on fire, this team is really, really good. Top 20, maybe even top 15 team in the country, but they're also fairly capable of losing to just about anybody. A lot of those same things are kind of true of Wake Forest and Hunter Salas. So this is a game that I think could go either way. And that line in particular feels a little strong in A&M's favor, although I would give them the advantage, especially as the home team. Ole Miss at Louisville, Tuesday at 9 as well. That one's on the ACC network, so that will follow the game between South Carolina and Boston College. So then you get Ole Miss at Louisville. That's going to be a fun one. FanDuel favoring the Cardinals by 3.5, although we did just find out that Kason Pryor is going to be out for the rest of the season with a torn ACL, a devastating blow for Pat Kelsey and the Cardinals. He suffered that injury during the Battle for Atlantis. Ole Miss, meanwhile, beat BYU. They beat Colorado State. Their only loss on the season was to Purdue by 2 in the championship of the Rady Children's Invitational. Chris Beard's team looking good in the early going. That should be a very fun one and a fun home game for Louisville. They already hosted Tennessee earlier this year. They're looking to have some better luck this time hosting Ole Miss. Two more games to get to. Florida State going on the road to take on LSU at 9 p.m. on the SEC network. So this game will follow Cal at Mizzou. FanDuel favors LSU by 3.5. The Seminoles, good for them. They're 7-1 on the year. Their only loss is to Florida. That's an acceptable loss. The problem is they just don't really have any good wins. This is a good opportunity for them to go pick up a potential road win over a quality LSU team and start to kind of establish themselves as a team worth paying attention to. Meanwhile, LSU, they're 6-1. Their only loss is to Pitt. Also a very good loss for them. They do have a better win on their resume as they beat Kansas State earlier this year. I like what we've seen out of LSU so far. I think they're going to take this one as the home team, and I think the better team, although Florida State certainly deserves some love for a strong start to the season. And then the only matchup on Tuesday between two teams ranked in our top 25. It's the final game of the day. It's on ESPN after that matchup between Syracuse and Tennessee. It is Kentucky, who is 8th in our top 25, and Clemson, who is 25th in our rankings. Clemson hosting Mark Pope and the Wildcats, again, 9:30 on ESPN. FanDuel, despite being the road team, favors Kentucky, although it's close, just a 1.5 point spread right now, according to the odds makers. Mark Pope's team, they're 7-0. Looking to go 8-0 with getting another big win. They already got a huge win on the season against Duke, but their other wins aren't great. Some of them are fine, nothing like terrible, but they really could use another signature win. They got a great opportunity, not only against Clemson tonight, but they'll take on Gonzaga in Seattle on Saturday. So a big week for Mark Pope and the Wildcats. Meanwhile, Clemson, 7-1 on the year. They just won their recent MTE by beating San Francisco and Penn State, two quality wins for Brad Brownell and the Tigers. Their only loss is a true road game against Boise State. We mentioned this at the time, but for Brad Brownell, who's criticized the Big 12 in particular for the way they schedule in non-conference, for him to put his money where his mouth is and go play a true road game against a good team like Boise State, it takes some stones to do that. And they didn't get the W there, but we'll see how much it impacts them, especially by turning around and getting nice wins over San Francisco, who beat that same Boise State team, mind you, and Penn State. Prediction for the day. I do not actually believe the ACC is going to go 0-10, although FanDuel right now favors the SEC in 9 of these 10 matchups, with the only game where the ACC team is favored being Louisville at hosting Ole Miss. And again, as we said, Louisville just lost Cason Pryor, so that's not going to be an easy one either. I actually have the SEC going 8-2. Whereas the only wins that are going to be picked up by the ACC in my predictions is Louisville. I do think they still kind of right the ships and rally the troops and get a W over Chris Beard and Ole Miss. And then Cal. Give me Cal going to Mizzou and picking up a W there. I like Mark Madsen. I like the quality of that team. Andrei Stojakovic has been playing some real good basketball. Ritis Petritis, the transfer from Air Force, who's been solid as well. I'm not super sold on Mizzou yet. They have the talent. Tony Perkins, Mark Mitchell, a great freshman class, but I think there's a chance that Cal can go in and disrupt them and get a W there. So 8-2 feels like almost, I don't want to say worst case scenario for the SEC. Clearly it's not, but they're favored in 9 of these 10 games, just a potential dominant performance from the conference. And again, not out of the question at all that they go a clean 10-0 in these games, but I don't think they're going to do that with the rest of the games. 6 more games coming up on Wednesday. We got a top 5 battle between Auburn and Duke at Cameron. That's going to be incredible. We're going to talk about that game, Bama at North Carolina, and the 4 other games rounding out the ACC-SEC Challenge on Wednesday, all coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, college basketball season is here, and there is nothing better than the atmosphere of a college hoops game. The anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy of the crowd, the unexpected coming to life, thrilling wins, and more. And now GameTime has a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams even easier. GameTime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. And it's not just for basketball. If you want to go to a concert, if you want to go to a stand-up show or a theater performance, all of it is there on GameTime. Whether it's GameTime's ticketing coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app feature, GameTime has you covered. And it's not going to be easy to get in the door in Durham, but if you happen to be in the Gainesville area, you want to see the Gators take on Virginia, we're going to preview that game for you in just a second. You can get 2 tickets in section 127 right at half court. Perfect view of the floor. They're $32 a piece. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. You can log on to the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Those 2 tickets for $64, you get them for $44 if you use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download the GameTime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. And folks, we're still giving you a preview of all 16 matchups as part of the ACC-SEC Challenge. My co-host, Isaac Shade, he's going to give you a preview of the Big 12 Big East Challenge, which also happens to be going on right around the same time in a future episode. But we got 6 more games here in ACC-SEC to talk about, and then we're going to close out the show talking about what we saw in the inaugural net rankings for this college basketball season. We're going to go through these games in order of what games are happening first. So we're going to start with the second biggest game of the day. Alabama, our 9th ranked team in the Locked On College Basketball rankings, going on the road to Chapel Hill to take on the 17th ranked Tar Heels of North Carolina. This game is on Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern time, and it will be on ESPN. It is a rematch of the Elite 8 from last season, a tremendous basketball game. Mark Sears, RJ Davis going at each other. Hubert Davis versus Nate Oates, 2 electric offenses. That was a fantastic game of basketball. And guess what? Nate Oates, Hubert Davis, RJ Davis, Mark Sears, they're all still in the mix here for this game. All a year older, a year wiser, a year ready to go to take this one down. It's going to be fantastic. Both these teams have already played really difficult schedules in the early part of the season. The Tar Heels are 4-3. Their best win is over Dayton. They did win at Hawaii. They beat American and Elon in 2 of their bye games. But their losses, nothing to feel too bad about. You lost to Kansas in a game that you were down 20 and crawled all the way back to take a lead. That was also a road game. You lost to Auburn in the Maui Invitational. Auburn is arguably the best team in college basketball, so you can't feel too bad about that. Now, I know Tar Heel fans would have liked to get a W over Michigan State, Tom Izzo's team, not projected to be, at the level that they've been in the past, and certainly a game that the Tar Heels would have wanted to win, but not the worst loss to take either. The big question for North Carolina is in the front court. We've talked about it ad nauseum on the show. Not going to get into it too much more here, but they got great guards. Davis is great. Seth Trimble's looking great. Elliot Cadeau is looking good. Even the freshmen are starting to come around into form. Drake Powell in particular has been really good as a shooter, as a floor spacer. But is Jalen Washington, Jalen Withers, Van Allen Lubin, is that enough in the front court for this team, especially against a Bama team that this was an area of concern for them last year, but they fixed that by adding Cliff Omoruyi from Rutgers. He's been a fantastic defensive anchor for Nate Oates' team, who is 6-2 on the year. They got nice wins. They beat Houston. They beat Rutgers. They beat Illinois. 3 very, very good teams right there. They also beat Arkansas State, McNeese, and UNC Asheville. Their losses at Purdue, nothing wrong with a loss there. They did lose to Oregon in the championship of the Players Era Festival. Mark Sears hasn't been playing exactly like himself. He had some games earlier in the year where he really didn't look like he was ready for the season to start, but he's been better as of late. I'm not super concerned about Mark Sears. I don't think anybody really should be. The freshman guards have played really well as well. LeBaron Phelan has been fantastic. Grant Nelson's played really well as a 5th year in the front court for that team. I'm very excited to see how this matchup shakes out between 2 very good teams who've played very good schedules, who have more losses combined than I think either of them thought that they would. Next up, Virginia at our 10th ranked team, the Gators of Florida. That one also at 7:15 on Wednesday. That'll be on ESPN2. Virginia's 5-2 on the year. Their only real win of note is against Villanova. They got spanked by both Tennessee and St. John's, lost those games by 24 and 25, respectively. Meanwhile, Florida, perfect 8-0 on the year. They got some good wins. Beat South Florida in the opener. They beat Florida State on the road. They beat Wake Forest and Wichita State in the ESPN Events Invitational. Main question, of course, Virginia is going to try to slow this Gators team down. Are they capable of getting guys like Walter Clayton and Will Richard and Elijah Martin out of their routine? If so, maybe they can make this a game, but Florida at home is tough to go against in this one. And then, of course, the other massive matchup on Wednesday, 9:15 Eastern time on ESPN, right after Carolina, Bama, you get Auburn at Duke, number 1 versus number 5 in our rankings. A win here cements Auburn as the best team in the country. I already think they are. their resume is staggering. They have already beaten Houston, Iowa State, North Carolina, and Memphis this year. That is an incredible quad of victories for this Auburn team. To me, this is their first true road game. And if they go out, they beat Duke at Cameron, it's not even a debate. I'm not sure it's a debate right now, although I can understand the argument for Kansas. But this is a potentially huge, massive victory for Auburn and just establishes them as the team to beat in college basketball going forward this year. For Duke, they're trying to avoid another loss. They already have 2 on the year, but it's nothing to feel too bad about. You lost to Kansas, you lost to Kentucky. Those are 2 of the 10 best teams in the country, arguably 5 best teams in the country. But Duke also wants a marquee win. They did go out. They beat Arizona at the McHale Center in Tucson. That's a good win. Arizona's not ranked anymore, and they haven't looked great this year, and it's possible that they continue to stumble and it ends up not being a great W for Duke. I think that's fairly unlikely. I mean, again, it's a quad 1 win for Duke unless Arizona's out of the top 75, which feels very unlikely to happen. But for Duke, you want to add another big win. And Auburn, even at home, is a monster win for this team if they're able to pick it up. Janai Broom versus Kaman Malawak in the front court. That feels like a huge matchup. Can Broom pull Malawak away from the rim? Does that allow Auburn's other guards to get to the basket without a rim protector there? And then it's just kind of Auburn's depth and experience versus Duke's raw talent. And, of course, the home court advantage, the Cameron Crazies, going to be an absolute blast on Wednesday. A couple more games to get to here before we give our overall projection for how we think this challenge is going to end up, and then talk about the net rankings. Pitt, our 16th ranked team in our college basketball projections, or rankings, I should say, they're going on the road to Starksville to take on Mississippi State. That's also at 9:15. That'll be on the SEC network. The Panthers, 7-1 on the year, got some nice W's, beat West Virginia, a win that's aging well for them. They also beat LSU and got a road win against Ohio State. We talked about that game on Monday. An epic end for the Panthers. Their only losses to Wisconsin. You can't feel too bad about that with the way the Badgers are playing. Meanwhile, Mississippi State 6-1 on the year. Their losses to Butler, who looked pretty good in that game against Mississippi State just last week. They got nice wins as well. They won on the road at SMU. They also beat UNLV and Utah. This should be a fun one. As I'm recording this right now, the FanDuel lines are not out. I think this is going to be a close one. I think Pitt wins. They're the better team, but Chris Jans is a good coach, and you never want to bet against a good coach at home. So this is going to be a really, really fun one. Texas going on the road to take on Kevin Keatts and the Wolfpack of North Carolina State. Also at 9:15. This one will be on ESPN2. Wolfpack started out the year 5-0. But they finished dead last in the Rady Children's Invitational after losing to both Purdue and BYU. No wins of note, although neither of those losses are too problematic for the Wolfpack. Texas lost their opener against Ohio State, but has won 6 in a row since then. Syracuse and St. Joe's aren't great wins, but they are decent enough victories. I think Texas is going to be favored here. I think they probably should be favored, but we've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. Not sure this team has enough depth to pick up a lot of quality wins. They should be good enough to out-talent NC State, but we'll see if that lack of depth comes back to bite them later in the year. Last but not least, Vanderbilt going on the road to take on the Hokies of Virginia Tech, 9:15 on Wednesday on the ACC network. Virginia Tech is having a rough year. In fact, I'll spoil this right now as I'm going to say it to end the show. Virginia Tech is the lowest team in the net rankings among the Power 5 conferences, the Power 4 and the Big East combined. Virginia Tech is lower than every single team in that group at the net rankings. Their losses are to Penn State, to Michigan, to South Carolina. They got an ugly loss to Jacksonville. Meanwhile, Vanderbilt, they're 7-1. Coach Mark Byington coming over from James Madison. He has been fantastic. We've seen a lot of coaches come in and have some immediate success. Byington at JMU, or at Vanderbilt from JMU, Darian DeVries at West Virginia, Pat Kelsey at Louisville. All of those have gone quite well for their respective teams. Vandy beat Cal. They beat Nevada, who's a very good team. They beat Seton Hall as well. Vanderbilt's the road team, but they should come in and pick up a nice W here against Virginia Tech. My overall predictions for this 6-game slate, I got the SEC going 4-2 with Florida, Auburn, Texas, and Vanderbilt picking up wins. For the ACC, I think North Carolina holds steady at home against Alabama, and I think Pitt goes on the road and beats Mississippi State to give the ACC a pair of wins on Wednesday compared to the pair of wins I gave them on Tuesday. That means the ACC finishes this event 4-12. SEC, of course, 12-4. Would not be a great result for the ACC if that's what ends up happening. We'll see if they can outperform my projections and get this thing closer to 500 between the two conferences. But we've teased it a few times, but early season net rankings, they're fun to glance at. They're fun to see some of the kind of goofy teams that show up earlier or higher than you'd expect them to. Do they mean much? We'll talk about that in a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5, and if you win, you get $150 in bonus bets. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And FanDuel has lines for certain teams to make the NCAA tournament. I know this isn't a team we've talked about today, but I saw Arizona State at plus 140. I'm real impressed. I'm impressed with Bobby Hurley's team. They almost beat Gonzaga in Spokane. They beat St. Mary's in the Acrisure Championship. I like this team. That's an easy bet for me. I think they're going dancing. Plus 140, smash that button. If you're like me, you want to do that, you want to join any of the other ACC-SEC bets, we talked about the lines that we have at this point, just visit FanDuel.com now to join today. As a reminder, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, folks, closing out the show, talking about the net rankings. They always come out about a month after the college basketball season begins. Here we have them on Monday, December 2nd is when they come out for the first time this season. And again, net rankings this early in the year, I don't want to say they don't matter, because they matter a little bit, but they also don't matter that much. Teams that have played, there are some teams that have played multiple non-D1 opponents. There's some teams that just haven't played that huge chunk of their schedule yet. And so you'll see teams that have only played like 4 games, 5 games, and then teams that have played 7 or 8 games. And just because of that, the rankings are going to be very unique for certain teams. Having said that, the teams that show up towards the top of this ranking are kind of the teams you would expect. The top 10 teams in the first net rankings of the season are as followed. Tennessee is at number 1 and Auburn is at number 2. The SEC real good at the top right there. Gonzaga comes in at number 3, followed by Duke at 4, Pitt at 5. What up, ACC? 5, the top 5 teams, 2 ACC, 2 SEC. What a topical day for us. Number 6, Florida, sticking with the SEC. 7 is Marquette, 8 is Kentucky, 9 is Kansas, and 10 is Illinois. So again, 6 of the top 10, part of the ACC-SEC challenge. Going to be some fun to see how those games play out this week. Duke is number 4 despite 2 losses. They're 1-2 in quad 1 games this year, but they are 4-0 combined in quad 3 and quad 4. Again, Duke's played a really tough schedule. I'm not surprised they're still very high in the net rankings, but that puts a little bit more pressure on that Auburn game. You don't want to be 1-3 in quad 1 games, even if none of the losses are bad. You'd like to start getting some W's in that spot as well. 11 through 25, Cincinnati, Ohio State, Alabama, Utah State. There's a mid-major for you. Oregon, UCLA, Wisconsin, little Big Ten run. Clemson, Iowa State, a little lower than you'd expect there for the Cyclones, but they haven't played a super competitive schedule. Houston is next, then Purdue, Baylor, Maryland. At 24 is UC Irvine, the Anteaters, and then St. Mary's comes in at 25. Irvine is obviously the team that stands out there. They have not played any quad 1 games. They are 1-0 in quad 2 games, and then they are 5-0 in quad 3 and 1-0 in quad 4. Again, you play a lot of games early. You don't lose any games that you're not supposed to lose. You can end up kind of gaming the net system, at least for a while. By the end of the year, this thing will straighten out in a way where UC Irvine, if they are a top 25 team, it's probably because they haven't lost a single game this season, which if that's the case, they probably deserve to be in that conversation. But at this point, anybody seeing a team like that and being like, whoa, it probably doesn't mean all that much, just the way the schedule has gone early in the year. Let's talk about some superlatives and then some best and worst for our high major conferences. The highest ranked team that does not have a quad 1 win is Illinois. They are 10th in the inaugural net rankings. They are 0-1 in quad 1 games, but they do have a quad 2 win, and they're 5-0 in quad 3 and quad 4 games combined. The lowest ranked team with a quad 1 win, this was kind of fun, Austin Peay. Austin Peay is 180th in the net rankings, below the halfway point among Division I college, or right around the halfway point, I guess, of Division I programs. But they won at Butler. And Butler right inside the top 75. So for Austin Peay, that counts as a quad 1 game for now. We'll see if it sticks as a quad 1 win for Austin Peay, but it was fun to see a team that low in the net rankings that has a quad 1 game this earlier in the year. The biggest fraud team to me, just looking through the top 25 and kind of what we saw, UCLA. I'm skeptical of UCLA. I'm not trying to bash them too hard, although I am skeptical about this program in general. But they're 16th, and they don't have a quad 1 or a quad 2 win. They haven't played a quad 1 game, and in quad 2 they're 0-1. That was a loss to New Mexico. So sure, they're 1-0 in quad 3, and then 5-0 in quad 4. So if you take out quad 4, this team's 1-1. I'm just not that impressed by what we've seen from UCLA yet, especially not to have them 16th at the net rankings. But again, these things will straighten themselves out. The team that's too low is just a little farther south than UCLA. That is the Aztecs of San Diego State. They're 60th. That shocked me. 60th. They're 1-2 in quad 1 games, but they're 2-0 in quad 2. And they just have not played any quad 3 or quad 4 games. This team hasn't played very many games. Again, that's kind of why I mentioned that. If you haven't played that many games, or if your games are against non-D1 opponents and they don't show up, that can kind of skew the data. 60th for San Diego State is crazy when you consider that this team has some really quality wins. And they lost to Gonzaga. That's not a bad loss by any stretch. Their Oregon loss, I think, is going to age fine. Oregon looks pretty good. They got wins over Houston and Creighton. Should not be 60th. They're behind Rhode Island. Rhode Island hasn't played a quad 1 or a quad 2 game. Rhode Island's 6-0 in quad 3 and quad 4 games, and they're ahead of San Diego State. Again, I'm not trying to bash the net system. I'm just saying these things are going to work themselves out as the season goes on. Another one that I found odd, Seattle U, the Red Hawks in the WAC, they're 105th, which isn't super high, but for a team that's 1-5, they're 1-5 on the year, and they're 105th. That's kind of crazy. They're 1-1 in quad 1 games. That's why they have a quad 1 win. They're 0-3 in quad 2 and 0-1 in quad 3. So they don't have any quad 4 losses, but they don't have any quad 3 wins. They don't have any quad 2 wins. They just have one quad 1 win. And it was a road game against UC San Diego, who is literally exactly 75th in the net. When UC San Diego falls just one spot, and that goes from a quad 1 win to a quad 2 win, Seattle U is going to plummet in the net rankings. Again, just some early season goofiness. Last thing we want to do here before we get you out and on with your day, talk about the best and worst in each of the 5 power conferences. For the ACC, Duke is at the top for that conference. They are number 4. We mentioned it. Pitt is also in the top 10 there. And then we already mentioned this, Virginia Tech, 233rd, not only the lowest in the ACC, that is the lowest among all the power conferences. Hokies not looking good in the early stretch of the season. The Big 12, Kansas is top at 9. Interesting to see only one team in the top 10 from the Big 12. TCU is the lowest, though, at 121. That is the highest among the last place teams in each of the power conferences. So the Big 12, not as dominant at the very top as we thought, but it seems like the depth in that league is certainly going to be a problem all year long. The Big East is led by Marquette at 7. UConn is down at, I think, 39 is where they ended up in the first net rankings. Seton Hall is the worst team in the Big East right now at 200. The only other power conference team at 200 or lower in the net rankings. Big Ten's top team is Illinois at number 10, and USC is their last team in 169th. Isaac and I joked about this on Monday, but I made a bold prediction that USC would be good this year, and so far it looks wildly incorrect at this point. SEC has the number 1 team in the country in Tennessee at the net rankings. Their last place team, surprisingly, is Lamont Paris and the Gamecocks of South Carolina. While they are in last place, they are only 135th, which is not too bad in the early part of the season. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back with recaps of all the exciting games on Tuesday, the ACC-SEC matchup in full swing, get you some more previews for the Big 12, Big East matchups coming up, and then a very fun slate of games this weekend as well. Stick with us here, Locked On College Basketball. Thanks again for listening, folks. As always, I want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until Wednesday, peace out.